If you want to be the most powerful person in the room, the absolute worst thing you can do is try to take control.
Which is, quite the statement to start with.
Right. I mean, I know that goes against literally every corporate leadership seminar you have ever attended.
Oh, absolutely.
It goes against every self-help book on the market and, well, basically the entire structure of how we climb the ladder today.
Oh, yeah, it's a complete paradigm shift.
But according to the document we are diving into right now, the only way to the very top is to actively race to the bottom. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're thrilled you're here with us.
It's quite the paradox to unpack today.
It really is. So our mission today is to explore this profound inversion of how modern society understands power and influence.
Right.
We're looking at a comprehensive document. It's titled Submission and Authority in the Kingdom. And the goal here, especially for you listening, in a culture that's just so obsessed with personal platforms and independence and, relentless self-promotion.
Which we all are, to some degree.
Yeah, exactly. The goal is to extract the hidden pathway to true influence that this text lays out. We are going to uncover how, according to this source material, the absolute most powerful leaders are actually formed through the grueling discipline of following. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and to really grasp this, we have to recognize how completely alien this framework is to our default settings.
Totally.
Like when you think about how we define authority today, it's almost always synonymous with dominance.
Yeah, it's about control.
Exactly. It's about the number of direct reports you have or the size of your budget or how many followers you can leverage online. It's seen as a prize to be seized.
It's a status symbol.
Right. But the author's argument here is fascinating because it fundamentally rejects that entire premise.
Right. The text introduces this concept of authority not as ownership, but as a, what do they call it? A sacred stewardship.
Yes, a sacred stewardship.
And to visualize this, the author uses this really striking analogy that I want us to keep in mind for this entire conversation.
It's a great visual.
It really is. It suggests that submission is exactly like the roots of a massive tree, or, if you prefer a modern equivalent, the deep hidden foundation of a skyscraper.
Exactly. Like when you watch a 50-story tower being built, there is this incredibly long, often tedious phase where absolutely nothing seems to be happening above ground.
Right. It's just a hole in the ground for like a year.
Yes. For months, it's just digging, pouring concrete, driving these massive steel pylons into the bedrock. It's messy, it's loud, and it's completely invisible to anyone walking by.
But, and this is the kicker, without that massive hidden structure underground, the shiny glass tower just collapses the second a serious storm hits.
It has no structural integrity.
Right. The height of the building is entirely dependent on the depth of the foundation. And what this framework reveals is that, well, most of us want the penthouse view without spending any time in the dirt.
That is so true.
So let's drill into the theology of the text here. Where does this idea of stewardship actually come from?
Well, the document grounds its entire argument in a very specific theological framework. It points primarily to the book of Romans, chapter 13, verse 1.
Okay.
And in theology of this text, this verse establishes a foundational premise, which is that all authority originates with God.
All of it.
All of it. Therefore, human authority is never autonomous. It is always 100% of the time delegated. You don't own the power. You're simply holding it in trust on behalf of the ultimate source.
Wait, so if I'm translating this to like a modern workplace scenario, I'm basically middle management for the universe.
That is
Like, I don't own the team, I'm just managing the owner's assets.
That is a perfect way to look at it, actually. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text argues that the exact moment a leader forgets they are middle management.
When they start acting like the owner.
Yes, the moment they view their role as ownership rather than stewardship,
Yeah.
that is precisely when authority turns toxic.
Wow.
That's when you get tyranny, you get manipulation, and you get leaders who use people as stepping stones.
Because they think the people belong to them.
Exactly. But when it's framed biblically, the document explains that leadership is actually shepherding. It draws on Hebrews 13.17 for this.
Right.
It outlines that a leader's job is to protect and nurture souls, knowing that they will ultimately have to give an account to the owner for how they handled that delegated power.
Man, that really shifts leadership from being this, like, cool VIP pass to a massive, weighty liability.
It makes it terrifying, honestly.
It does. And what's wild to me is that this concept wasn't just taught as some neat piece of abstract philosophy in a classroom. The source material spends a lot of time showing how this was physically embodied.
Yes, the text is very focused on the practical reality of it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The author frames this ultimate subversion of power by pointing to Jesus washing the disciples' feet in the Gospel of John, chapter 13.
Yeah, and it is a staggering image when you actually understand the cultural context of the ancient Near East.
Right, because within the theology of this document, this is the king of the universe, like the ultimate authority. And he is deliberately taking off his outer garments, kneeling down in the literal dirt, and performing the task that was strictly reserved for the absolute lowest servant in the household.
It's completely backward to how the world works.
Totally.
And the text highlights this to show that true leadership in this specific paradigm is downward mobility. It is self-giving love. It completely shatters the idea that leadership means you finally get to stop serving.
Okay, I get the concept. I really do. But practically speaking, how does downward mobility actually train someone to lead?
Well,
Because the text spends a ton of time on these historical patterns of what it calls a relational apprenticeship.
yes, the source material emphasizes that God rarely, if ever, forms leaders in a vacuum.
Right.
You don't just, go off into a cave, read a leadership manual, and emerge ready to run a nation.
That would be much easier, though.
It would. But you learn the mechanics of delegated authority through proximity to it. And we see this first with the example of Moses and Joshua.
Okay, let's look at them.
Joshua didn't just inherit command of the entire nation of Israel out of nowhere. The text points out that he was Moses' assistant for decades.
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 So what is Joshua actually learning by just being in the room for that long?
He is observing the mechanics of handling immense pressure. The text implies Joshua watched how Moses depended on God rather than his own intellect.
Oh, wow.
He watched how Moses handled the constant, relentless complaining of the people.
Which there was a lot of.
So much complaining. But he watched Moses handle it without constantly striking back in anger. By being close, Joshua absorbed that patience. Proximity acts as a psychological stress test.
That makes a lot of sense. But proximity alone isn't enough, right? Because I feel like you can be close to a leader and still just be secretly gunning for their job.
That happens all the time.
Right? You have to somehow strip away that blind ambition.
Precisely. Which is why the text naturally progresses to the example of the prophets Elijah and Elisha. Now this is a fascinating relationship. Elisha famously asks for and receives a double portion of Elijah's prophetic mantle.
Okay, let's pause and explain that, because double portion sounds like, I don't know, a fantasy video game power-up.
Like, give me twice as much magic.
Exactly, like he's asking for twice the superpowers.
Yeah, it's very easily misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
But in the cultural context of the text, a double portion was actually the legal inheritance right of the firstborn son.
Oh, interesting.
So Elisha wasn't asking for twice the supernatural power. He was asking to be recognized as Elijah's true spiritual heir.
He was asking for the responsibility.
Yes, taking on the heavy familial responsibility of continuing his mentor's exact work. And the text makes it clear that this inheritance wasn't seized by Elisha's ego. It was granted after years of faithful, loyal, and incredibly unglamorous service to Elijah.
So he wasn't trying to build his own brand. He was just completely submitted to his mentor's mission.
Yeah.
And then the text gives us a New Testament example with Paul and Timothy, which seems to add another layer to this whole thing, the safety to fail.
Yes, this is a great addition. Paul refers to Timothy as his true son in the faith.
Right.
This is a model of what the text calls spiritual fatherhood.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, classroom theology. Paul gave Timothy real practical ministry opportunities.
He let him actually do the work.
Right, allowing him to make mistakes, to learn, and to be corrected within a relationship built on deep, pre-existing trust.
Okay, I have to jump in here and just push back on this whole concept for a second.
Go for it.
Because conceptually, this all sounds incredibly noble, but functionally, I know what you, the listener, might be thinking right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is this just about hanging around a leader, fetching their coffee, and carrying their bags?
That's a very fair question.
Right, like, if I just keep my head down and do grunt work for 5 years, does that magically make me a leader? Because I know plenty of people who serve under leaders for years and never actually grow. They just become really bitter.
That is the crucial distinction the text makes.
Mm.
It is not about passive compliance. And it's not about just physically enduring grunt work.
Okay.
It is about the internal mechanism of what the document calls a classroom of obedience.
Classroom of obedience, yeah.
It points to the early church deacons in Acts chapter 6. These were men chosen to serve tables, literally handling the daily distribution of food to widows so the apostles could focus on teaching.
Which, let's be honest, is the ancient equivalent of managing the company cafeteria.
It absolutely is.
Right.
But think about the psychology of serving tables. When you were doing mundane grunt work, you were constantly interrupted, right?
Oh, yeah.
You were underappreciated, and you are dealing with people's most basic petty complaints all day long.
Someone's always mad about the soup.
Exactly. The text argues that this specific friction acts like sandpaper on the human ego.
Wow, sandpaper on the ego.
Yes, it forces you to find your intrinsic value in the act of serving itself, rather than the applause of leading.
That is profound.
If you are just carrying bags while harboring resentment, thinking, I could do this better than my boss, you aren't learning submission.
You're just competing in your head.
Right, you're just biding your time until it's your turn to dominate. True submission, according to the text, actively cultivates patience, empathy, and compassion, precisely because it strips away your need to be recognized.
Let me stop you right there, though,
Okay.
because that brings up an even heavier question.
Okay.
For a modern listener, the word submission immediately sets off alarm bells. And rightfully so, I think.
Oh, 100%.
We have all seen authority abused. We've seen toxic workplaces, abusive leadership, terrible cover-ups. So what does this framework mean when authority goes completely off the rails?
Right.
Like, if my boss is stealing my ideas, or if a leader is acting unethically, does submission mean I just smile, become a doormat, and keep serving the tables?
The source material provides a resounding no to that. And it actually spends a significant amount of time parsing out the boundaries of this.
Okay.
The text explains that submission must always, without exception, be paired with discernment.
Discernment, okay.
Why? Because if we go back to that foundational premise from Romans 13 we talked about earlier, human authority is delegated. It is not supreme.
It has a boss.
Exactly. The text cites Acts 5.29, where the apostles boldly state, "We must obey God rather than men," when they were ordered by the ruling council to stop preaching.
So human authority has a hard objective limit.
Absolutely. When delegated authority contradicts the ultimate authority, obedience to the ultimate authority is required. But what's fascinating here is how the text actively models the mechanics of respectful challenge.
What do you mean by mechanics?
Well, it doesn't just say, disobey if the boss is bad. It provides historical blueprints for how to actually challenge leadership faithfully.
And the examples they give are pretty intense. I mean, think about it. Have you ever had to walk into your CEO's office and tell them that their new pet project is a total moral failure?
Most people would just quit instead.
Right. But that is the modern equivalent of the first example the text gives, which is the prophet Nathan confronting King David.
It's a brilliant example. I mean, David was the king. He was the absolute, unquestioned authority in Israel, and he had committed grievous, systemic abuses of power.
Adultery with Bathsheba, orchestrating the murder of her husband.
Yeah, terrible things. And Nathan directly confronts him. But the text asks us to look at why and how Nathan did it. Nathan wasn't driven by a desire to spark a coup.
Right.
He wasn't trying to cancel David so he could take the throne himself. The text says Nathan was driven by a desire to protect the covenant.
Okay, let's translate protect the covenant for someone who isn't like a theologian. What does that mean functionally?
It means protecting the core values, the foundational mission, and the moral integrity of the entire community. Nathan was prioritizing the health of the organization, in this case the nation of Israel and its relationship with God, over the ego of its current leader.
So he was challenging authority to save the community, not to promote himself. And the text pairs that with a New Testament example between two absolute heavyweights of the early church. Paul publicly correcting Peter in Galatians chapter 2.
Right. Peter was acting hypocritically. He was withdrawing from eating with Gentile believers because he was afraid of a certain influential faction.
So he was playing politics.
Yes. And Paul confronts him to his face, publicly. And the text notes that Paul did this because the very truth of the gospel was being compromised.
So it wasn't a disagreement over strategy or like what color to paint the church lobby.
No, not at all.
It was a core issue of truth.
Exactly. And by analyzing these examples, the document outlines this highly practical four-step framework for healthy conflict.
Okay, walk us through it.
If you find yourself needing to challenge authority, step one is examining your own motives. You have to be brutally honest with yourself. Am I challenging this leader for the good of the team and the mission? Or is this just my ego, my frustration, and my desire for control?
Man, that requires a level of self-awareness that most of us actively avoid.
It really does. Step 2 is maintaining respect for the person and the office, even while addressing the error.
So don't burn the bridge just to make a point.
Right, you can attack the problem without attacking the humanity of the leader. Disagreement does not require contempt.
That's good.
Step 3 is grounding the challenge in objective truth. In this text's case, scripture, rather than just personal preference or subjective feelings.
You have to have actual grounds for the challenge.
Exactly. And finally, step 4 highlights the need for communal discernment.
The text mentions the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 for this, right?
Yes. When the early church had a massive theological dispute, they didn't just fracture into rogue, isolated factions.
Like we tend to do today on the internet.
Very much so. But they gathered the leaders, debated, listened to opposing views, and sought guidance together. This prevents you from living in an echo chamber of your own rightness.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, submission in this complete framework actually protects the truth because it insists on communal accountability.
Submission actually protects the truth. Okay, so we've covered the theological paradox of the race to the bottom. We've looked at the historical stress tests of mentorship, and we've established the real-world boundaries when things go toxic.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. But let's pivot to the immediate application now.
Okay.
If you are listening to this right now, how do you actually practice this on a random Tuesday morning? Like, let's say you're a software engineer working on a collaborative project, or you're managing a group of volunteers at a local charity. How does this ancient text apply to your daily routine?
Well, the source material is surprisingly practical at the end.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
It doesn't just leave you with high-minded theology.
Mhm.
It offers specific exercises to translate this paradigm shift into daily life.
Yeah, there are two exercises in the text that really stood out to me. The first is what the author calls the 1-month ministry apprenticeship.
That's a great one.
And I want to challenge you, the listener, to actually visualize trying this. The concept is to find an area to serve under a mentor for 30 days. But here is the catch.
There's always a catch.
Always. Your sole goal is not to fix all their problems, and it is definitely not to show them how incredibly competent you are. Your goal is strictly to observe.
Just watch.
Watch how that leader makes decisions under pressure. Watch how they handle unfair criticism.
It's intentionally putting yourself back in that classroom of obedience we talked about.
Exactly. Think of it like a load-bearing stress test in engineering. You do not build a 50-story skyscraper on a foundation until you have rigorously stress-tested the concrete.
Right, you have to know it can hold the weight.
This 30-day apprenticeship is the stress test for your ego. Because if you crack under the pressure of fetching coffee, or if you get deeply offended that you aren't receiving credit for some minor task, you are going to absolutely shatter under the weight of a real boardroom crisis.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. And to complement that stress test, there's another exercise the text calls Capture Your Leadership Responsibilities.
Oh, yeah. Talk about this one.
It asks you to literally list out all your current tasks, decisions, and commitments on a piece of paper. Once you have that list, you run every single item through what we can call a submission filter.
Let's walk through that. How does the submission filter actually work in a real scenario?
Well, let's use your software engineer example. You've just finished a massive coding project with 3 other people, and your manager asks you to present it to the executives.
Okay, pretty standard.
You look at that task, the presentation, and run it through the filter. You ask yourself, is my approach to this presentation aligned with stewardship or ownership?
Oh, wow.
Am I genuinely going to use this moment to highlight the unseen work of my team which serves them? Or, if I am being totally uncomfortably honest, am I going to subtly frame this so the executives think I was the primary genius behind it?
Oof. That is confronting.
It is designed to be. It forces you to evaluate the invisible mechanics of your daily actions. And this raises an important question for you, the listener. Are you willing to embrace the hidden, mundane acts of service as the literal training ground for your future authority?
That's the real test.
It is. Are you genuinely willing to do the unseen work that doesn't get a round of applause?
Because according to this text, if you skip that unseen work, you are basically building that massive skyscraper without digging a foundation first.
Precisely. You might build something that looks really impressive to everyone walking by for a year or two.
Sure, you get the quick results.
You might get the title, the followers, the corner office. But because you bypass the psychological sandpaper of submission, Your character will lack the structural integrity to withstand the inevitable storms of real leadership.
And the storms always come.
They always do.
So what does this all mean to bring this all together? The core journey we've taken through this deep dive reveals a total foundational paradigm shift.
A complete inversion.
Yeah. In the framework presented by this source material, authority is never a prize to be seized by your own ambition. It's not a life hack, and it's not something you can demand just because you are the most talented person in the room.
Right.
True authority is a sacred trust, and it is forged in the quiet, often unglamorous, and deeply humbling crucible of submitting, serving, and following. The absolute best leaders are the ones who spent years being the best followers.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that leads to a final thought I want to leave you with, building directly on the principles we've unpacked today.
Go ahead.
We know from the text that God uses these hidden seasons of submission to prepare people for the weight of leadership. We saw the mechanics of it with Joshua, Elisha, and Timothy. But I want you to consider your own life right now.
Yeah, think about where you were at today.
What if the current season you are in, where you might feel completely overlooked, where you feel stuck in a subordinate role, or where you are just deeply tired of serving someone else's vision while your own dreams are on hold?
Which is such a frustrating place to be.
It is. But what if that isn't a delay in your ultimate calling at all? What if this exact season of obscurity is the mandatory structural reinforcement you need so that when true authority is finally handed to you, you don't collapse under its weight?
Wow, it makes you look at the digging phase a whole lot differently, doesn't it?
It really does.
The dirt, the noise, the frustrating feeling of being hidden entirely underground. It is not a delay, it is the foundation. And the deeper those invisible roots go, the stronger the tree will ultimately stand. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep digging.